Welcome to Aspen Leading Edge. This is Patty Roberts from St. Mary's University School of Law. Today I have Dr. Chance Meyer, visiting professor of practice at New England Law in Boston, part of New England Law's Academic Excellence Program, and also Dr. Patty Baia, who is the Assistant Dean for Teaching Effectiveness at Touro Law, and who served as the lead instructional designer on a program we're going to talk about today. So thank you both for being guests on Aspen Leading Edge.
Thank you, Patty.
So happy to be here. Thank you.
Well, you guys are doing some really important work in the academy that I think will be new to a lot of people, but is increasingly appearing in law schools, and that is focusing on learning theory in a way that, as a legal academy, we often haven't done. I know that you're both experts in learning theory, and one of the projects that you're working on is the pre-law mini course for Aspen called Mind for Law. So, Chance, if you would start by just telling us about Mind for Law and how it got started and what we can look for.
Yeah, well, it began as a book idea, and we quickly realized it'd be more effective as a mini course. Essentially, it's metacognitive training. It's a small, maybe 6 to 10 hour mini course for anyone who wants to improve their performance in law school. It would work for a struggling learner or a learner who's performing quite well but wants to up their game a bit, just optimize their results. It would work for pre-law students as well, or current law students. And essentially it teaches people how to use effective learning methods, evidence-based learning methods, rigorous learning methods, by sharing with them the research that shows why and how those methods are effective so that they can make up their own minds to adopt study practices that otherwise might seem sort of intimidating or too difficult to take on. That's really the heart of the program: rigor and effort. Embracing it, embracing difficulty, embracing complexity, embracing ambiguity, those things about the law that are so challenging.
I took a look at the beta version of one of the intro videos. Good graphics. We'll get to that in a little bit, Pat. But first, for our listeners, Chance, who may not be as familiar with the term, what do you mean by metacognition, using metacognition in law?
Yeah, this program is about how to learn the law rather than a program that helps you learn the law. This program helps you learn about how to learn. Metacognitive, that term just means thinking about your own thinking or your own learning. Meta in the sense that you're above it, sort of looking down upon it, and cognitive just means thinking. So the program kind of helps people understand how their minds work so that they can get the most out of their mind as a learner. Things like encoding, memorization, recall of memory, using knowledge in problem solving, the kind of mental moves you make, how to construct the kind of knowledge that helps you do complex problem solving, critical thinking, issue spotting, all these things that happen for lawyers and, learners of the law. We unpack exactly how those things happen in the mind so that people can adopt study practices that make them happen more effectively and more often.
I was intrigued by the video where it says the way that you think you learn best may not be the way you learn best. And I think that's counterintuitive to us as legal educators. I think we regularly tell students, figure out what works for you. Can you push back on that a little bit and tell us why that may not be the case?
Yeah, you've really put your finger on the real purpose of the program. In a nutshell, that's what it is. This counterintuitive truth that while we think everyone knows how they learn best, the research very much shows that's not the case. It's demonstrably, provably untrue that everyone, or even most people, know how they learn best, and there's a simple reason. Effective learning strategies, effective learning activities tend to be high difficulty and therefore uncomfortable. Things like retrieval practice, memory exercises like that are far less comfortable than passive activities like rereading something, highlighting something, things that we tend to kind of enjoy doing and that are less cognitively challenging. So because the most effective learning activities also happen to be the most difficult, our minds play this trick on us as learners, all human learners. Our minds play this trick on us where it goes, that feels uncomfortable, that feels difficult to me, therefore therefore it must not be how I learn best. That doesn't work for me, that learning activity. What works for me is highlighting, is rereading, or these things that are more comfortable but demonstrably ineffective. So that is the problem that we're up against as educators and as learners and as learning communities. The counterintuitiveness of effective learning activities. This program very much targets that problem. That's sort of the table setting for the whole program with the learner at the beginning, accepting this truth that maybe I don't know how I learn best necessarily, and I need to disrupt that intuition and at least be open to having that challenge.
Gosh, highlighting and rereading, that was my whole strategy to get through law school. So I can see where it would be uncomfortable to look at alternatives to that. So, Patty, how did you get involved in the project? I know we've talked before on the podcast about your instructional design work and your assistance in improving the study and success of students at Touro Law, but can you tell me how you got involved in this particular program?
Yeah, so Aspen Publishing actually was looking for this careful design of the program. Chance is essentially the author. And so, really trying to bring this program to life and thinking about the learner and through the lens of a learner and thinking about how can we sort of craft this so that it's a sort of asynchronous, self-paced environment that would really be a motivator and a tool for the learner to really bridge gaps that they may have in their education or thinking about the way they educate themselves. Totally appealing to me. It's like my dream to finally bring to law students something that other fields have dived into. This is, as you said, Patty, this is something that law schools don't really talk about so much and don't really talk about and get involved with. I mean, a lot of the departments do, student services departments do, academic departments certainly do have these conversations, but we really haven't touched on it in law schools in a way that I think would bring learners to a level of understanding their knowledge, understanding where their knowledge fits and where their gaps are. And so this really is fun for me to be involved in this project. Really fun.
What have you found in the Mind for Law program that you've been working on with Chance to be one of the most effective techniques that you also use with your students at Touro Law?
Yeah, I think it's important to think about students as we get further into the program. So there's a lot of building the program starts off with to really have students understand the context of and the reasons why Chance is suggesting these things. So I think it's important for them to have this big picture. And Chance does an amazing job building this sort of level of understanding for the learner. So that's a huge piece of it. But my favorite part at the end of the day is modules 3 and 4, if I may say, because there's practical elements in there where learners are plotting out, thinking through where their knowledge lands in a real way. I think that is the professor's dream is really understanding and having the students understand that they don't know everything they think they know before they go towards an exam. They don't know what they're missing for the bar exam, and they don't know how to know what they're missing for the exam or the bar exam or quizzes or whatever it is. And what this program does, in my opinion, is open the eyes. It's not a tips and tricks type of program. It really is hard work and dedication and motivation and understanding where it is your brain is and your motivations and your techniques and your strategies and where you put your efforts, where those all land. And I think that's just like an instructional designer's dream to have those students in law school. And this program gifts that to students thinking about law school who are struggling in law school. It's so timely, in my opinion.
Absolutely. I'm glad you mentioned the bar exam because I know we've looked at some spaced repetition work and things like that for our bar takers. Let me back up a little bit because I find your progression to the academy to be very interesting. Chance, you were a capital defense attorney before you became an educator representing death sentenced inmates in trial and appellate courts in state and federal jurisdictions. Tell me a little bit about the transition. How do you move from that really critical and exhausting, draining, difficult work to this?
Yeah. Well, You just kind of telegraphed the answer to that question because that work is very much emotionally exhausting. I did that for almost a decade. And the simple answer is got a gig teaching as an adjunct and fell in love with teaching and made the switch. The more complicated answer is in that work, you spend so much time on the mind science, right? Defending someone who's committed murder and been convicted of murder. The state very much has on its side kind of natural intuitions, natural moral outrage people feel at that sort of crime. And the role of the defense lawyer fundamentally in that space is to try to share that there are explanations for why people do what they do. So you work with a lot of clinical psychologists, neuropsychologists, neuropharmacologists, and you learn more than you ever wanted to know about how the mind works and human behavior. So when I got a taste of education, I quickly realized there's something similar going on in these two seemingly very disparate spaces, which is people make assumptions about how the mind works based on their intuitions, how it feels like it is. My behavior feels like a free choice. My learning feels like something that I know about more than anyone else, because after all, I'm the only one in here. Those sorts of intuitions are very strong. And meanwhile, in both spaces, there's mountains of research showing that our intuitions are often misleading. Not all of our behavior is perhaps attributable to free choice. Not everything we feel about how we learn ends up being true. So I saw a gap in both spaces, a gap between what people tend to do and what experts know about how human decision-making, human learning. And so I immediately became fascinated with that. And that's why I made the decision to go back and get the doctorate in education. I wanted to understand how this stuff works, and found a whole new career for myself as an educator. And it's been, one of the best decisions I ever made to make that career change.
That's terrific. So, as far as I know, you've been Assistant Dean of Academic Success and Professionalism at Nova Southeastern. Now you're in New England Law's Academic Excellence Program. Have you incorporated some of the things that you're teaching in mind for law with your own students at those two institutions? And if so, what kind of progress have you seen?
Absolutely, yes. Everything in this program is something that the Academic Excellence Department at New England Law has used with students in some context. The program is entirely original, but the concepts behind it are things that we've surfaced and researched in our learning environment. And yes, we have seen some positive impacts, particularly the 2L course for struggling learners at New England has performance in that course measured both in terms of total points and in terms of self-assessment. If you give self-assessments across a series of essays in that course and have people score themselves against the same rubrics that you're going to score them, and then take a composite measure of the difference. In other words, how different their own self-assessment is of their work versus their sort of earned scores. The smaller that difference and the greater the total points, that composite variable relates so closely, a statistically significant amount, to bar performance, to GPA improvement, and to other outcomes. And that course, unlike a lot of academic support courses, is not really teaching law or even legal analysis so much as it's teaching how to learn the law. It's using law as a sandbox to learn how the mind works and to learn about learning, rather than behind the scenes using principles from the learning science, not letting the learner in on what you know or what you're doing, applying it to design learning activities, but not letting them know why, right? Or why they work. We've kind of taken the approach that if you teach people, it's kind of a sell at first, it's like, I came to law school, why am I learning about learning science? It's a bit of a sell at first, but it's very hard to unknow something. So once you as a learner learn about something about the mind, you kind of get a nagging voice in your head that tells you to learn in a certain way, right? And if you find yourself rereading or doing passive learning activities over and over, it's very hard to quiet that voice that knows I really should be doing something more uncomfortable, more difficult, more rigorous, more challenging. And the more a learner responds to that voice, the better the outcomes you see across all sorts of contexts, because it's learning itself, right? We're not teaching to pass the bar. We're not teaching to a certain domain or a certain subject matter, teaching how to use the mind effectively and how to learn efficiently. And that supercharges learning across contexts.
So, for either or both of you, what are some of these uncomfortable techniques that you urge law students to engage in? And what could even professors try to do to encourage those less comfortable but more effective learning techniques.
Patty, you want to dive in?
Well, I think one of my hopes actually is just that. So my biggest audience, although students are an audience of mine, my biggest audience are professors. So my hope is that concepts and ideas from this program, in addition to other programs that might come forward from Learn to Learn or Mind for Law or whatever we're moving forward with, bring some of this to the faculty. And there are many techniques that Dr. Meyer go over in the videos that faculty can adopt as assignments, graded or ungraded. There's ideas that sort of build upon how an end result of something could look and think about when they're teaching, and different targets that they can, objectives that they can kind of reach and think about when they're building their syllabi and thinking that through. There's many elements that I see here where for alignment between what the students need to do or think about what they need to do, and also what the faculty can do to support that and build that for them. I see direct alignment there between them.
I'd add to that as a couple examples, things that a lot of faculty members might already be familiar with, like retrieval practice. So rather than, if you want to encode, memorize information rather than rereading it, try to recall it cold from memory and then check yourself, either with a practice problem or some other X. One useful little nugget is once you've made an outline, which hopefully all law students are doing, making their own outline, formalized, operationalized knowledge construction. Right there on the page, confirmable. Here's my knowledge laid out in a tangible form. Now I can check it, I can adapt it, I can confirm it. Once you have that, rather than then reducing it to a checklist or a cheat sheet, rather than then changing it over into a bunch of isolated knowledge elements and flashcards, rather than doing any of those things, that outline can be a giant flashcard. A practice problem is a long way to go to force retrieval of one knowledge element, right? Meanwhile, the entire negligence section of your torts outline is something that you can try to look away and explain it all cold from memory as if you're teaching it to someone, bullet by bullet, line by line, and then look back at the document and see, what did I misstate or what did I know? The first few times you do that, it's very uncomfortable and it's very discouraging because you don't have the whole thing memorized, right? By the sixth time you do that, by the seventh time you do that over a period of days, hopefully sleeping in between and doing some memory consolidation while you sleep, you'll find, holy cow, my long-term memory is more massive than I ever could have imagined. I absolutely can memorize huge amounts of material that's available to me if I engage uncomfortable learning activities like retrieval practice.
So I want to just point out one thing that I want you to take it a step further, because when students memorize the law, we often then see regurgitation in the exam of what they memorized, because that's what they've got a handle on. But that's not enough. So I don't want to leave it hanging there. What will they do with that material that they have memorized in order to be successful?
Yeah, the program Mind for Law very much starts at the end and works backwards. So we start with a mock exam problem, so they understand the context of what am I going to do with mine. And then we work our way backwards, how to construct the knowledge and get it to a place where you can apply it in problem solving. Something really interesting about that problem of, on an exam, I just see regurgitation. Usually that comes from uncontextualized knowledge. This is what I mean by that. Often we define legal knowledge as just like rules, but then what you do with it, that's all very much skills, or that's some other soft things. I think if we start to redefine legal knowledge more broadly, meaning it's not just the rules, it's also the context in which rules arise, case facts and examples, precedences. It's also the operative functional part of the knowledge that tells me what series of inquiries to apply to the facts. It's also factual examples showing the situations where the rules arise, so I can recognize the similarity between those and exam facts. When you have that quality of knowledge, operative, contextualized, elaborative, deep, organized knowledge, you don't run into that problem on the exam where you're just kind of brain dumping something you know, because you can't unknow, you can't unsee the applicability of it to the problem. This is like a precedent case I read. The facts are different, but the problem elements are the same. And I can't stop my mind from mapping the solution of that precedent case onto these new facts, because I'm naturally making inferences now, semantic inferences. analogical inferences, these things that happen in complex problem solving if you have expert knowledge. You can't keep your brain from doing it. So that's where folks are trying to get. And that's one reason I say don't trim down those outlines to a topic list. Keep all that rich meaning. Keep that knowledge semantically saturated as if you're an expert. You want to get to the point where a topic list would be useless to you. What good is a topic list to, what good is a list of torts topics to a torts professor, right? Once you have expert knowledge, that becomes useless, superfluous. My knowledge is so much deeper and more organized than that, that would never do anything for me. That's where the learner wants to get. Seems impossible. There are ways to do it. Long-term memory is vast. There are efficient ways to fill it up with a bunch of rich knowledge, and that's the goal of the program, and it all resolves into an essay, 2 essays actually, in 2 different legal contexts, and then a self-assessment and kind of organized debrief of that to show element by element how legal knowledge of a certain nature translates into legal analysis, the doing.
Outstanding. So this is the new Aspen course called Mind for Law. It's 6 to 10 hours, you've mentioned. It can be a mini course before law school or during law school for learners who want to improve their performance. But Patty mentioned something called Learn to Learn. And I just want to ask you, what is Learn to Learn and how does Mind for Law fit in?
Mind for Law is the first mini course in what we're hoping will be the Learn to Learn program. So we've started off with the individual learner, trying to build a greater understanding of learning itself among learners of the law on the individual. Not only individuals learn, right? Teams learn, communities learn, organizations learn, educators learn. So we're hoping to expand the Learn to Learn program for other audiences and into other contexts. So for educators, for law schools, for committees, for leadership teams, understanding decision-making, learning at all of those levels can reap a lot of benefits for law students.
Great. I feel like I would be remiss if I didn't mention that your latest article in 2024, A Model of Evidence-Based Practice for Law Schools to Improve System Outcomes, will be in our own St. Mary's Law Journal, volume 55. And can you tell me if someone were to have an interest in learning more about the learning theory for Mind for Law, would that article help them do that, or does the article do something different?
For legal educators and administrators, I would say yes, that would be a great place to start if you're interested in how law schools can make evidence-based decisions. Organizational learning. How do we learn to improve system outcomes like bar passage, employment, all the learner outcomes, harder. So to understand more of the Mind for Law sort of cognitive aspects of learning, meaning where the unit of analysis is an individual learner. I put an article in UDM Law Review, the co-author, Nicole Noel, who is a colleague of mine, called The Gray Box of Legal Analysis, which sort of applies all of this cognitive science to the legal education context and is a really nice preview of the sort of things that Mind for Law does.
Okay, now our final question, and that is, what do each of you think the future of legal education looks like in the coming decade? And Dr. Patty Baia, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, I answered that question in our other podcast, Patty, and I think I'm going to answer it a little differently, actually. So, how about that for
Ooh, an evolution.
an evolution?
Yeah.
My hope for the future of law school and educators in general is I want to speak directly to faculty. So faculty are doing some really amazing things in their classrooms, and I don't think administrators and necessarily the world knows what they're doing. It's not, they don't always put everything on their syllabus. It's not coming up in faculty meetings. I think faculty tend to end up working in silos. So my hope for the future of law education, which is what the ABA I think is trying to do, and your work is really doing, Patty, when you have these podcasts, and even Chance as an author is doing, is really the future of law school is not working in silos, really coming out of best practices and terrible practices and sharing all of them. I think that is really going to be the key for the future of the law school, and to turn to other higher education elements departments, genres, disciplines, and really think about what's already working in those ways and how can we bring that into the law school environment. And again, and get out of the silo working. Come back to, if you have a section, there's a multiple sections of that class, you guys should be working together as a group to think about minimum objectives, which is the ABA is asking us to have now for these courses. But go beyond that. You should be sharing videos. You should be having similar assignments. You should have similar questions on your exam for your students so that they're common amongst the section. So I really think there's this collaboration that needs to be the future of the law schools.
I love it. From your lips to faculty members' ears.
There you go.
And Dr. Chance Meyer, what are your predictions for the future of legal education in the coming decade?
No surprises for me. I think it's a focus on learning. I think that most sectors are moving in that direction. You see a lot more chief learning officers at Fortune 100 companies than you used to see in the past because we're figuring out that, I've heard it said, all the simple problems have been solved, right? It's like all we have left are complex problems.
That's interesting. I haven't heard that before, but
Yeah, and it kind of squares with experience, right? The world is a complicated place and getting more so exponentially. Meanwhile, our lifespans are getting longer exponentially. So we need to learn how to learn faster as societies, communities, organizations, teams, and down to the individual. So dislodging that kind of assumption where we started, which is everyone knows how to learn. They're smart, they'll figure it out. We all know how we learn best. Dislodging that and getting to a place where we can sort of like set our pride aside as human learners, myself included very much, set those intuitions aside and be open to the idea that there are ways of doing this that we might understand. Being smart isn't enough. It's a kind of starting point, but it's not in and of itself sufficient. So focus on bringing in folks like Patty, instructional designers, trying to use evidence-based methods and evidence-based decision making, both for law schools and organizations like Aspen, which has put this incredible team of talented people together to do something with Mind for Law that's really innovative. And I think it's fair to say they're kind of out on a limb in doing it. We haven't done this kind of thing before. Exactly. It doesn't really exist already. And I think they've done an incredible job of bringing it to life, of executing on this original vision. And that sort of thinking, that sort of embracing difficult learning and innovating in that direction, I think is going to need to be the future of legal education for all of it.
Well, thank you, Dr. Patty Baia and Dr. Chance Meyer, for telling us more about what's to come from Aspen Publishing, your Mind for Law mini course, part of a new series called Learn to Learn. We look forward to the course's release. Is there any ETA on that?
January is the soft ETA, and I say it with that inflection because I'm not super confident about that month, but if not, then soon thereafter.
So early 2025, we should be able to find Mind for Law with Aspen Publishing. Well, I want to thank you both for what you're doing to move legal education forward in some exciting ways, and I appreciate your being on the podcast. If our listeners would like to hear from additional thought leaders in the Academy, you can find other episodes on Aspen Leading Edge's podcast page on the web, or you can go to your favorite podcast channels. Thank you.
Thank you.